everyone, and welcome to another episode of Space News, the weekly show where we dive into the launches that occurred last week, launches slated to occur next week, Starship news, and other interesting space news. This week's highlights are that Starship SN-15 is now on its test stand, a Soyuz launched 3 more humans to the International Space Station, and the Ingenuity helicopter is dropped on the surface of Mars, awaiting the first powered flight on another celestial body. Before we get started, I have to ask you to please subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos are published to ensure that the news is as up to date as possible. Today is Saturday, April 10th, and there is a lot to talk about. So let's get started. Let's start with the Starship news we have. Last Friday, the 2nd of April, SpaceX finished stacking Starship prototype SN-15 in the high bay at their Boca Chica build site. Yesterday, the 9th, SpaceX rolled SN-15 down Highway 4 to the launch site, where it was then lifted onto its testing stand. SN-15 is the first Starship of a new generation of Starship prototypes with hundreds of software and hardware upgrades over the SN-8 to SN-11 generation. We've already seen an ambient pressure test to check for leaks. Over the next few weeks, we expect to see first a cryoproof test, which is where the team tests SN-15's ability to hold super cold fuels by filling the vehicle up with liquid nitrogen. The second thing we need to see is a static fire test, which is where the team lights up all 3 Raptor engines for 1 or 2 seconds. If somehow these tests go perfectly, we only need to see one of each test before SN-15's high altitude flight test. The orbital launch pad has been making great progress, and a new FAA document confirms that SpaceX plans to build a 143 meter tall launch/catch tower with a large lightning rod on top. But what kind of catch system will be constructed to catch the world's largest single stage? Who knows. We also saw a ground propellant tank for the orbital launch pad roll out to the pad. Oh, and speaking of catching things, Elon tweeted that the ideal scenario for catching Starship will be catching the 15-story tall vehicle while it is still in the belly flop position. This allows there to be no landing burn and no landing legs, which is a current issue with Starship. The second best thing will be the same landing burn as what we've been seeing with the current Starship prototypes, but the landing burn will result in the launch tower catching Starship, similar to the Super Heavy booster. Now over to the launches we saw last week. The first launch was a Starlink mission, Starlink 23, which launched from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida at about 12:34 p.m. Eastern on April 7th. This was the 7th flight for this particular booster, and SpaceX of course recovered it 610 kilometers downrange on the Of Course I Still Love You autonomous drone ship. Both fairing halves were previously flown, and only one was recovered from the water about 707 kilometers downrange by the Shelia Bordelon ship. The next launch was a very exciting launch, as it was a crewed launch. A Russian Soyuz 2.1A launch vehicle launched the crewed Soyuz MS-18 spacecraft to the International Space Station with Roscosmos astronauts Oleg Novinsky, Pyotr Dubrov, and NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei. This occurred at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan at a gruesome 3:42 a.m. Eastern Time or 7:42 a.m. UTC. 2 orbits, or 3 hours later, the spacecraft successfully docked to the International Space Station's Rassvet module. Congrats to both Roscosmos and NASA, and congrats to the new expedition crew. Unfortunately, there are no launches scheduled to occur over the next 7 days. However, I would not be surprised to see this change. Fortunately though, we have lots of other news to talk about. First, the Ingenuity helicopter that launched to Mars underneath the Perseverance rover has been slowly deploying itself and was just dropped on the surface of Mars. The rotors have been unlocked and a spin test has been completed. All this is in anticipation of the first controlled powered flight on another celestial body. This is scheduled to take place no earlier than Wednesday. Second, we saw engineers drop a 14,000-pound test version of the Orion spacecraft into the Hydro Impact Basin. The test is part of a series of drop tests for the Artemis II mission, which will see the first humans to fly past the moon as part of the Artemis program. Third, we saw a single RS-25 engine complete a full duration static fire. This engine will eventually help power the first stage of the SLS rocket. And lastly, we finally got an answer as to what caused the SN11 explosion. Elon said that a relatively small CH4 or methane leak caused a fire on engine 2. Fixes are already in place for SN15's flight. And that's gonna do it. Thank you all so much for watching. It means so much to me, and I really do thank you. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing and comment down below if there's anything I missed. Let's hope we get to see at least one launch next week. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you next time.